These people appear to have come at least some miles, and that secretly, for they avoided being seen in the city. Joseph behaved with great humility during such visits, retiring and looking on from some distant corner. I saw also Anne's maid and an old man servant come from Nazareth to the crib. The maid was a widow and related to the Holy Family. She brought all sorts of necessaries from Anne to Mary, with whom she took up her abode. The old man shed tears of joy and returned with news to Anne. The day after, I saw the Blessed Virgin and the infant Jesus leave the cave crib, with the maid for some hours. Stepping from the door of the cave, Mary turned toward the shed on the right, went some steps forward, and concealed herself in that side cave, in which, at the birth of Jesus, a spring had welled up. She remained there for 4 hours, because some men, spies of Herod, had come from Bethlehem, in consequence of the rumors set afloat by the words of the shepherds, that a miracle had there taken place in connection with a child. These men met St. Joseph in front of the crib cave. After exchanging a few words with him, they left him with a contemptuous smile at his humility and simplicity. The crib cave was retired and very pleasantly situated. No one from Bethlehem went there. Only the shepherds whose duties called them thither. No one in Bethlehem took any interest in what was going on outside, for, in consequence of the influx of strangers, the city was all alive, and much buying and selling going on. Cattle was being bought and slaughtered, for many people paid their taxes in cattle. There were numbers of pagans in the city in the capacity of servants. The wonderful apparition of the angels was soon noised among the dwellers of the mountain valleys, far and near, and with it the birth of the child in the cave. The innkeepers from whom the Holy Family on their journey had received hospitality now came, one after another, to do homage to him whom unknown they had entertained. I saw that hospitable keeper of the last inn, first sending presents by a servant and then coming himself to honor the child. I saw also the good wife of that man who had been so cross to Joseph, and other shepherds and good people coming to the crib. They were very much affected by what they saw. All were in holiday attire and were going up to Bethlehem for the Sabbath. The good wife might have gone to Jerusalem, which was nearer, but she preferred coming here to Bethlehem. A relative of Joseph and father of that Jonadab, who at the crucifixion of Jesus presented a strip of linen to him, had also come to the crib cave on his way to Bethlehem from the Sabbath. Joseph was very kind to him. This relative had heard from people of his place of Joseph's wonderful situation. He came therefore to bring him gifts and to visit the infant Jesus and Mary. But Joseph would not accept anything, although he pawned the little she-ass to this relative with the understanding that she might be redeemed for the same amount of money received. After that, Mary, Joseph, the maid, and 2 of the shepherds who were standing in front of the entrance celebrated the Sabbath in the crib cave. A lamp with 7 wicks was lighted, and upon a small table covered with white and red lay the prayer rolls. The numerous eatables presented by the shepherds were either given to the poor or handed around for the entertainment of others. The birds were hung on a spit before the fire, turned from time to time and sprinkled with the flower of a reed-like plant which was very plentiful around the area of Bethlehem and Hebron. From its grain a shining white jelly was prepared and cakes baked. I saw under the fireplace very hot and clean holes in which birds could be roasted. After the Sabbath, the Essenian women got a meal ready under the arbors which Joseph, with the help of the shepherds, had put up at the entrance of the cave. Joseph went into the city to engage priests for the circumcision of the child. The cave was cleared and put in order. The partition that Joseph had put up in the passage was removed, and the ground spread with carpets. For in this passage near the crib cave, the place for the ceremony was prepared. Joseph returned from Bethlehem with 5 priests and a woman whose services were necessary on such occasions. They brought with them the circumcision stool and an octangular slab with all that was needed for the ceremony. All this was placed in order in the passage. The stool was hollow and formed a chest, which could be taken apart, thus affording a kind of low seat with a support on the side. It was covered with red. The circumcision stone was perhaps over 2 feet in diameter. In the center was a metal plate under which in a hollow of the stone were all kinds of little boxes containing fluids. These boxes were in separate compartments, and at one side lay the circumcision knife. The stone was laid upon the little stool, which, covered with a cloth, always stood on the spot upon which Jesus was born. And the circumcision stool was placed next to it. That evening a repast was spread under the arbor at the entrance to the cave. A crowd of poor people had followed the priest, as is usual on such occasions, and during the meal they were continually receiving something both from the priest and from Joseph. The priest went to Mary and the child, spoke with the mother, and took the child in their arms. They also spoke to Joseph about the same child, about the name the child was to receive. They prayed and sang the greater part of the night and circumcised the child at daybreak. Mary was very much troubled, very anxious about it. After the ceremony, the infant Jesus was swathed in red and white and was white as far as under the little arms, which also were bound, and the head wrapped in a cloth. The child was again laid on the octangular stone and prayers recited over it. If I remember rightly, the angel had already told Joseph that the child should be called Jesus, and I have a faint recollection that one of the priests did not at first approve the name. Consequently, they still continued in prayer. Then I saw a radiant angel standing in front of the priest and holding before him a tablet like that above the cross, upon which was inscribed the name of Jesus. I saw the priest writing the name upon a scrap of parchment. I know not whether he or any of the others saw the angel, but deeply moved, he wrote the name under divine inspiration. After that, Joseph received the child back and handed it to the Blessed Virgin, who, with 2 other women, was standing back in the crib cave. Mary took the weeping child into her arms and quieted it. Some shepherds were standing at the entrance of the cave. Lamps were burning and the dawn was breaking. There was some more praying and singing, and before the priest departed, they took a little breakfast. I saw that all present at the circumcision were good people. The priests were enlightened and later attained salvation. Alms were distributed the whole morning to many poor people who presented themselves. Afterward followed a crowd of beggars, filthy, black creatures very repulsive to me. They carried bundles and, coming up from the valley of the shepherds, passed the crib as if going to Jerusalem for the celebration of a feast. They were very boisterous, cursing and scolding horribly because they did not receive by way of alms as much as they wanted. I do not know exactly what was the matter with them. During the ceremony of circumcision, the ass was tied further back than usual. At other times it stood in the crib cave. During the day I saw the nurse again with Mary attending to the child. That night the child was very restless from pain. It cried, and Mary and Joseph tried to soothe it by carrying it up and down the cave. While reflecting upon the mystery of the circumcision, I had a vision. I saw 2 angels with little tablets in their hands, standing under a palm tree. Upon one tablet were pictured various instruments of martyrdom, of which I remember one, a pillar which stood in the middle. On it was a mortar which had 2 rings. On the other tablet were letters denoting the seasons and years of the church. On the palm tree, and as if growing out of it, was kneeling a virgin, her flowing mantle or veil, for it was fastened over her head, floating around her. In her hands was a heart upon which I saw a tiny shining child. I saw an apparition of God the Father draw near to the palm tree, break off a heavy branch that formed a cross, and lay it on the child. Then I saw the child raised as it were on the cross, and the virgin reaching the palm branch with the crucified child on it to God the Father, the heart alone remaining in her hand. On the evening of the following day, I saw Elizabeth on an ass and accompanied by an old servant coming from Judah to the cave. Joseph received her most cordially. The joy of Mary and Elizabeth was extremely great as they embraced each other. Elizabeth pressed the child to her heart. She slept in Mary's cave next to the place in which Jesus was born. Before the sacred spot stood a stool upon which they often laid the child. Mary told Elizabeth all that had happened to her, and when Elizabeth heard of their difficulty in getting a lodging on their arrival in Bethlehem, she wept heartily. Mary gave her all the details of the infant Jesus' birth. I remember hearing her say that she had been in ecstasy 10 minutes at the time of the Annunciation, that it appeared to her as if her heart had grown double its size, and that she was filled with unspeakable happiness. But at the child's birth she had experienced an intense longing. She felt while kneeling that she was upheld by angels, and as if her heart was broken asunder and one half taken from her. She had also been 10 minutes in ecstasy at the time of the birth. She had been conscious of an emptiness within her, a longing after something outside of herself. Suddenly a light shone before her, and the figure of the child seemed to grow before her eyes. Then she saw it moving and heard it crying and coming to herself. She raised it from the rug to her breast, for at first, seeing it environed with glory, she had hesitated to take it up. Elizabeth said, "Thou hast not given birth in the same way as other mothers. The birth of John was sweet also, but it was not like that of thy child." Once I saw Elizabeth with Mary and the child concealing themselves toward evening in the side cave. They remained there the whole night, for visitors from Bethlehem were approaching by whom they did not want to be seen. The Jewish women do not leave their children long without other nourishment than the breast, and so the infant Jesus was fed in those first days on pap made of the sweet, light, nutritious pith of a certain rush-like plant. As in the temple at Jerusalem, the holy feast of the Maccabees began at this time. It was also celebrated by Joseph in the crib cave. He fastened 3 lamps with 7 little lights on the walls of the cave, and during a whole week lighted them morning and evening. Once I saw in the cave one of the priests who had been present at the child's circumcision. He had a roll of writings from which he prayed with St. Joseph. It seemed to me that he wanted to find out whether Joseph kept that feast or not. I think, too, that he announced to him another, for a fast day was near at hand. I saw the preparations for it in Jerusalem. Food was prepared the day before the feast. The fire was covered. Servile work was put aside. The doors and windows were hung with tapestry. Anne often sent servants with gifts of provisions and utensils, all of which Mary soon distributed to the poor. Once Anne sent a beautiful little basket of fruit with large, newly blown roses stuck in among it. The pink roses were paler than ours, almost flesh-colored, and there were some yellow and some white. Mary was very much pleased and placed it beside her. And now came Anne herself, accompanied by her second husband and a servant. The infant Jesus stretched out his little arms to her, and great was her joyful emotion. Mary gave her a full account of all, as she had done to Elizabeth. They mingled their tears together, pausing at times to fondle the infant Jesus. Anne had brought with her many things for Mary and the child, coverlets, swathing bands, etc. Although Mary had already received so many things from her, Yet the crib cave was still quite poor in appearance, since whatever was at all unnecessary was given away at once. Mary told Anne that the kings from the east were approaching with rich gifts, and that their coming would attract much attention. Anne therefore resolved to go and stay with her sister, who dwelt at some hours' distance, and to return after the departure of the royal visitors. Then I saw Joseph set to work to clear out the crib cave as well as those in its vicinity, in order to prepare for the arrival of the kings, whom Mary in spirit had seen coming. He went also to Bethlehem to make the second payment of taxes and look around for a dwelling, for he intended to settle in Bethlehem after Mary's purification. Some days after their departure from home, I saw the caravan of Theokeno come up with those of Mensor and Seir at a ruined city. Rows of tall pillars were still standing here, and in many places large beautiful statues. A band of wild robbers had taken up their quarters among the ruins. They were clothed in the skins of beasts and armed with spears. They were of a brownish color, short and stout, but very agile. The three caravans left this city together at daybreak, and after journeying half a day, rested in a very fertile district where there was a spring, around which were many roomy sheds. This was an ordinary halting place for caravans. Each of the kings had in his train as companions 4 nobles of his own race, but he himself was like a patriarch over all. He took care of all, commanded all, dispensed to all. In each caravan were to be found people of different color. Mensor's race was of a pleasing brownish color. Seir's was brown, and Theokenos of a bright yellow. I saw no shining black, saving the slaves, of whom each king possessed some. The nobles, holding staves in their hands, sat upon their dromedaries high among the piled-up packages, which were covered with hangings. These were followed by other animals almost as large as horses, on which servants and slaves rode among the baggage. On their arrival, they unloaded the animals, and watered them at the spring. This spring was surrounded by a little mound upon which was a wall with 3 open entrances. In this enclosed space was a cistern, somewhat lower than the surrounding surface. It had a pump with 3 pipes, furnished with faucets. Over the cistern was a cover usually kept locked, but a man from the ruined city had accompanied the travelers, and he, on payment of a tax, unlocked the reservoir. The travelers had leathern vessels which could be folded perfectly flat. They were divided into 4 compartments, which, when filled, afforded drink to 4 of the camels at once. These people were extremely careful of the water. Not a drop was suffered to go to waste. Then the beasts were put up in an enclosed but uncovered space close to the spring, the stall of each animal being separated from its neighbors by a partition. There were some troughs before them, into which was poured the feed which had been brought with them. It consisted of corn, the grains of which were as large as acorns. Among the baggage were bird baskets high and narrow, which hung on the sides of the animals. Among the broad packages, in the separate compartments of these baskets, either singly or in pairs according to their different sizes, were birds like doves or hens. They served for food on the way. In leathern chests they had loaves, all of the same size, like single plates, closely packed together. Only as many as were needed were taken out at once. They had with them very costly vessels of yellow metal, set with precious stones. They were almost exactly of the shape of our sacred vessels, some like chalices, some like little boats and dishes, out of which they drank and upon which they handed around the food. The rims of most of these vessels were set with precious stones. The 3 races were somewhat different in costume. Theokeno and his followers, as well as Mensor, wore high caps embroidered in colors and white bands wound thickly around their heads. Their short coats reached to the calf of the leg and were very simple, with only a few buttons and ornaments on the breast. They were enveloped in light white and very long mantles which trailed behind. Seir and his followers wore caps with little white pads and round cowls embroidered in colors. They had shorter mantles, which were, however, longer behind than in front. Under their mantles were short tunics buttoning down to the knee and ornamented on the breast with laces, spangles, and innumerable glittering buttons, button on button. On one side of the breast was a little sparkling shield like a star. All had bare feet bound with laces to which soles were fastened. The nobles wore short swords or large knives in their girdles, and they had many bags and boxes hanging about them. Among the kings and their relatives were men about 50, 40, 30, and 20 years old. Some wore their beard long, others short. The servants and camel drivers were very much more simply clothed. Indeed, some had only a strip of stuff or an old garment around them. When the beasts had been fed, watered, and stalled, and the attendants themselves had drunk, a fire was made in the middle of the enclosure in which they had encamped. The wood used for that purpose consisted of sticks about 2.5 feet long, which the poor people of the surrounding country had brought hither in well-arranged bundles, as if prepared expressly for travelers. The kings constructed a 3-cornered log pile and laid the sticks around the top, leaving an opening on one side to admit air. The pile was very skillfully put together, but I cannot say for certain how they lit the fire. I saw one of them put one piece of wood into another, as if into a box, swing it around and round a little while, and then draw it forth burning. I saw they kindle a fire, and then I saw them killing some birds and roasting them. The 3 kings and the ancients acted, each one in his own family like the father of the house, cutting up the food and helping it around. The carved birds and little loaves were laid on small dishes or plates which stood upon little feet and passed around. And in the same way the cups were filled and handed to each one to drink. The lowest among the servants, of whom some were Moors, reclined on the bare earth. They appeared to be slaves. The simplicity, the kindness, the good nature of the kings and nobles were unspeakably touching. They gave to the people who gathered around them something of all that they had. They even held out to them the golden vessels and let them drink like children. Mensor, the brownish, was a Chaldean. His city, whose name sounded to me something like Akajaja, was surrounded by a river and appeared to be built on an island. Mensor spent most of his time in the fields with his herds. After the death of Christ, he was baptized by St. Thomas and named Leander. Seir the Brown on that very Christmas night stood prepared at Mensor's for the expedition. He and his race were the only ones so brown, but they had red lips. The other people in the neighborhood were white. Seir had the baptism of desire. He was not living at the time of Jesus' journey to the country of the kings. Theokeno was from Media, a country more to the north. It lay like a strip of land further toward the interior and between 2 seas. Theokeno dwelt in his own city. Its name I have forgotten. It consisted of tents erected on stone foundations. He was the wealthiest of the 3. He might, I think, have taken a more direct route to Bethlehem, but in order to join the others, he made a circuitous one. I think that he had even to pass near Babylon in order to come up with them. He also was baptized by St. Thomas and named Leo. The names Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar were given to the kings because they so well suited them, for Caspar means he is won by love. Melchior, he is so coaxing, so insinuating, he uses so much address, he approaches one so gently. And Balthasar, with his whole will, he accomplishes the will of God. From Mensor's city, Seir dwelt at the distance of a 3-day's journey, each day counting 12 hours, and Theokena further on, at a distance of 5 such days. Mensor and Seir were together when they saw in the stars the vision of the birth of Jesus, and both set out on the following day with their respective caravans. Theokeno also had the same vision in his own home. and he hurried to join the other two. Their journey to Bethlehem was about 700 and some odd hours. In the odd number, six occurs. It was a journey of about 60 days, each day 12 hours long, but they accomplished it in 33 days, on account of the great speed of their camels, and because they often traveled day and night. The star that guided them was like a ball from whose lower surface light streamed as from an open mouth. It always appeared to me as if guided by an apparition that held it by a thread of light. By day I saw, walking before the caravan, a figure more brilliant than the light of the sun. When I reflect upon the length of the journey, the rapidity with which they made it appears to me astonishing. But those beasts have so light and even a step that their march looks to me as orderly and as swift, their movements as uniform, as the flight of birds of passage. The homes of the three kings formed a triangle with one another. Mensor and Seir dwelt nearest to each other. Theokena was the most distant. When the caravan had rested till evening, the people that had followed helped to load the beasts again, and then carried off home all that the travelers left behind them. When the caravan set out, the star was visible, shining with a reddish light, like the moon in windy weather. Its train of light was pale and long. The kings and their followers went part of the way on foot beside their animals, praying with heads uncovered. The road here was such as to prevent their traveling quickly, but when it became level, they mounted and pushed on at a swift rate. Sometimes they slackened their pace, and all sang together, the sound of their voices on the night air producing a most touching effect. When I gazed upon them riding forward in such order, their hearts filled with joy and devotion, I could not help thinking, "Ah, if our processions could only pattern after this." Once I saw them passing the night in a field near a spring. A man from one of the huts in the neighborhood unlocked it for them. They watered their beasts and, without unpacking, refreshed themselves by a short rest. Again I saw the caravan upon a high plateau. On their right extended a mountain chain, and it seemed to me that they were drawing near to a point in the road where it again made a descent to a thickly settled district whose houses lay among trees and fountains. The inhabitants of this place wove covers out of threads stretched from tree to tree, and adored images of oxen. They bountifully supplied food to the crowd that followed the caravan, but the dishes out of which they ate were used no more. I was surprised at that. The next day I saw the kings near a city whose name sounded like Kausur, and which was built of tents on stone foundations. They stopped to rest with the king to whom the city belonged, and whose tent palace lay at a little distance. The three kings had since their meeting traveled 53 or 63 hours. They told the king of Kausur all that they had seen in the stars. He was very greatly astonished. He looked through a tube at the star that was guiding them, and in it he saw a little child with a cross. He begged them, in consequence, to inform him on their return of all that they discovered, that he might erect altars and offer sacrifice to the child. On the king's departure from Kausur, they were joined by a considerable train of nobles who were going to travel the same way. Later they rested at a spring and made a fire, but they did not unload their camels. When again on their way, I heard them softly and sweetly singing together short strophes, such as, "Over the mountains we shall go, and before the new king kneel." One of them began, and the others took up and sang with him the strophes, which they in turn composed and intoned. In the center of the star was plainly visible a little child with a cross. Mary had a vision of the king's approach when they were resting a day in Kausur, and she told it to Joseph and Elizabeth.